Hi, everyone. It's so good to see you. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are. Welcome to our next topic. Guess what? Electrolytes on our basic chemical pathology series. My name remains Dr. Iya Ezebasi. Please enjoy yourself on this lecture. Thank you very much. Permit me to share my screen. Yeah, how do we do that again? Okay, so share the screen. Oh, this is nice. All right. Like I said, our topic for today is electrolytes. And I want to thank you so much for your support all this while. You've been so wonderful. We are reaching more, getting to our 30,000 views with more than 1.3 subscribers. I want to say thank you so much. Please remember to like, share, and subscribe to our videos. And also leave a comment to tell us if we are doing something well or there's something that you'd like us to do better. So what are my expectations for today? You should be able to define electrolytes after this lecture. You should be able to tell me the functions of electrolytes. You should be able to tell me about specific electrolytes, especially sodium, potassium, chloride, and bicarbonate. Then you should also be able to explain to me what is electrolyte imbalance and the conditions that are associated with electrolyte imbalance. So fun fact, a new feature, fun fact. So why do we get electrocuted so easily? That is because our body contains various ions like sodium, potassium ion, chloride ion, and a lot more others which have the tendency to conduct electricity. So this makes our body a very, very good conductor of electricity. So next time you're playing with electricity, remember that you have a body that's full of water and ions, and you're a good conductor. Always remember to put something under your legs while touching electricity. Thank you very much. So what are electrolytes? By chemical definitions, electrolytes are like charged particles, charged ions, they can be positively or negatively charged. If they are positively charged, you call them cations because in an electric field, they move towards the cathode. If they are negatively charged, you call them anions because they move towards the negative the anode in an electric field. So they actually are able to conduct electricity, and they exist, kind of like dissolved in fluid compartments in the body, and they are very useful because they perform a variety of functions, in the body that keeps the body working. All right, so what are electrolytes you have in the body? This is sodium, my friend here is potassium, then you have chloride, your bicarbonate, your calcium for bones, your phosphate goes along with calcium, your magnesium, your copper, zinc, iron, manganese, I think that's selenium, chromium, molybdenum. There are some other ones too, like the sulfates are there also, and a lot of others also. So, but these are the few that I want to mention for now. So, what are their functions? Why are they so needful? Why do we need them? Number one, they're essential minerals. We need them for building bones. We need them for enzymatic reactions. We need them to help to in the catalysis, enzyme catalysis. We need them also for a lot of other things, okay? For instance, if you're talking about movement of water in the body, you can't miss it. You need sodium, you need chloride, to help with the osmotic pressure. If you're talking about maintenance of acid-base balance, don't forget the hydrogen ion, don't forget your bicarbonate, all right? If you're talking about action potentials, usually before you are able to send a message, to a part of the body, you have to send it through the nerves. And the nerves have a kind of way of conducting electrical current along it, okay, before it's able to send a message. So these ions are the ones that carry the electrical current that allow the formation of action potential in muscle and nerves, and they control the secretion of many hormones and neurotransmitters. They also help to stabilize protein structures in enzyme. A very good example would be iron in hemoproteins. Okay, that's a very complex globulin, and the iron helps to stabilize the quaternary structure of that particular protein. And they also aid in releasing hormones from endocrine glands. So you can see that they are very, very necessary. Some other ones, I think they also help to maintain electrical stability, as in the case of chloride, and all that. So let's just look at some of them, okay, in person. So sodium is like a major cation in body fluids, and like I said, it's essential for maintenance of normal membrane function. It's also responsible for about, I think, 90% of the osmotic pressure that is exerted in the body. So you usually find it in body fluids, and your primary rate of excretion will be urine and sweat, feces also. Then potassium, mainly find them inside cells. They're also necessary for normal membrane function, especially when it comes to action potential, your depolarization, your repolarization. And you find it mainly inside cells, like I have said, and it's usually gotten rid of in the urine. For chloride, wow, chloride is a major anion in the body fluid, and it helps in the maintenance of electrical stability. It also has a great function in being a part of the HCl that you find in the stomach that helps digestion of breakdown of proteins. All right, calcium is normal for normal muscle and neural function. It also is a very integral part alongside phosphate of bone. All right. Then phosphorus, you need that in high energy compounds like ATP, nucleic acids. It's also a part of bone matrix, but this time around as phosphates. Okay. Then magnesium is a very important cofactor of various enzymes, and you also need it for normal membrane function. Then if you look at trace elements like iron, like I said before, they're an important component of hemoglobin, myoglobin, and cytochromes. These are very important enzymes in the body that we need for life, and iron helps them to work. It's stored as ferritin or hemosiderin, and you get rid of it in urine. Zinc is a cofactor of many enzyme systems, especially carbonic anhydrase. It's also good for maintenance of reproductive health, especially in males. All right, and then copper is required as a cofactor for hemoglobin synthesis, which is very essential part of the red blood cells. It's gotten rid of in the urine and feces. Then manganese is a very important cofactor for many enzymes, and without them, those enzymes will not work. Then cobalt is a cofactor for transamination reactions, okay, which are enzyme reactions. Anyway, and minerals, is kind of like a mineral in vitamin B12. Without it, you will not be able to form cobalamin. It's also gotten rid of in feces and in urine, okay? So generally, as we have seen from the table, that excretion of the ions mainly occur through the kidneys. Some amounts you find like a chloride in sweat, sodium in sweat, and also some of them in feces. And then if you do have a situation where you have excessive sweating, you may find a significant loss of some of these ions, especially when we talk about sodium and chloride. That is why if you do taste your sweat, it's salty. That's because of the sodium and chloride. Then if you do have a severe vomiting or diarrhea, you will also have a lot of ions being lost. For instance, if you're vomiting, you will have a lot of chloride being lost. If you have diarrhea, you would have loss of sodium, you will have loss of bicarbonate, you would have loss of even chloride also, yeah, you would have loss of that. You will also have loss of potassium. This is because the digestive juices that are produced by the pancreas are very rich in these ions, okay? And so when you do have diarrhea, you are getting rid of, those juices without them being reabsorbed. So you would lose a lot of these ions, and that can cause disruptions, okay? And then when you want to regulate the amount of these ions in the body, the respiratory system can also help. The renal functions also very useful in allowing the body to regulate the levels of these ions in the body. And if these ions are not regulated, tightly regulated, you would have imbalances, and imbalances can, lead to so many things going wrong that you don't want to go wrong. All right, so let's look at sodium. The chemical formula for sodium, I don't need to say it, isn't it? It's, I think it's Na with a plus superscript. And it's, like I said, the major cation of the extracellular fluid. If you want to forget anything, don't forget that. The normal rate is about 135 to 145 millimoles per liter. And it is responsible for about 1/2 of the osmotic pressure gradient, the gradient between, the interior of the cells and their surrounding elements. And it's also responsible for about 90% of the osmotic pressure exerted in the ECM. So you find out that it is very, very important in maintaining water balance, because the movement of water follows the concentration gradient created by sodium. All right, so when there is an imbalance in it, you may have water movement that is not favorable for the body, resulting in either dehydration or resulting in water intoxication, as the case may be. All right, so usually you get it from diet. We take a lot of it, especially if you're on a Western diet. You may have about 130 to 160 a day in your diet. This varies with race. Okay, I think the highest is in the Western diet. I remember the time I had to eat a pretzel on the flight. Wow, it was much, the salt is much. So, but human beings only require about 1 to 2 millimoles per day. So it's, taken in the digestive system into the system to be used. So the excess now is now excreted via the kidneys. You could also have some excretion through sweat. Let's not forget that. So how do we maintain sodium balance? Okay, usually the exchange changes that you see in sodium concentration are regulated through blood pressure, and volume. Like if you do have increased blood volume and pressure, you would have a particular peptide called natriuretic peptide is produced, I think, in the atria of the heart. Okay, it's released, and what that natriuretic peptide does is that it increases sodium and water loss in the urine, and it reduces thirst. It also is able to inhibit ADH, aldosterone, epinephrine, and norepinephrine. All right. So also, when you have things like a decreased blood volume and pressure, a system is put in place. I remember the last video I talked about the renin-angiotensin-aldosterone system. That's one of those systems. So you now have an endocrine response when you have decreased blood volume and blood pressure. I have talked about it. Please go and look at my other video on water balance. Please look at them. You will see this in detail. You have an endocrine response. You have increased ADH, aldosterone, the RAS mechanisms, being triggered, which will help to restore water and salt balance. Okay. All right. So you please watch my earlier videos. You'll see this in this thing. So if you do have situations where the sodium levels are lower than normal, the lower limit of normal, which is about 136, some places you have 135. So if you have 135 and less, sometimes you say 136, but in our own locality, it's about 135. So if you do have lower than normal concentrations, you would have what is called a situation that is called hyponatremia, and it's usually associated with excess water accumulation in the body, which dilutes the sodium. So what can cause it? Well, you can have conditions, any condition that will make you continually lose sodium. If you have a situation where you continually lose sodium, or you're not taking in enough sodium, all right? those things can cause hyponatremia. Let's say, for instance, if you're excessively sweating, you're losing a lot of sodium. If you are vomiting, you are losing sodium. If you have diarrhea, you would lose sodium. If you use diuretics are drugs that help you to urinate, and most of them do so by tampering with the sodium potassium ATPase pump. And if you do use them, some of them have the ability to cause hyponatremia because they encourage loss of sodium, because when you lose sodium, you also lose water. Okay, so those can also cause hyponatremia. Then if you have excessive production of urine, because urine is a fluid that is used to get rid of waste products, excess sodium, excess ions, and things. If you do have excess production of urine, you will also lose a lot of sodium, so you would have hyponatremia. And also, if you do have diabetes, acidosis, whether it is metabolic acidosis or diabetic ketoacidosis, you may also have hyponatremia because you do lose a lot of water and salts. So hypernatremia, what is hypernatremia? If you do have sodium levels above the upper limit of normal, that is above 145 milliequivalents or millimoles per liter, you also could have hypernatremia. Remember, it's the opposite of hyponatremia. Hypo is low, hyper is high. So usually hypernatremia can be caused by dehydration, but this dehydration specifically is the type where you lose where you're losing water without losing sodium. Okay, so if you do have loss of sodium in excess of loss of water, you could have hypernatremia, and it can result from water loss from the blood, where you have hemoconcentration of all blood constituents. Also, if you do have hormonal imbalances involving ADH is antidiuretic hormone. Please watch my former videos. Antidiuretic hormone helps in the body to lose water without losing salt. Okay, so you're losing water without losing salt. That is a kind of situation that can give you hypernatremia. And if you do have also hormonal imbalance involving aldosterone is a hormone that helps in the reabsorption of sodium. So if you have a situation where the aldosterone is hyperactive for any reason, or the concentration of aldosterone is higher than normal, a situation that is called hyperaldosteronism, some texts call it aldosteronism, it may also result in hypernatremia. Then you do have potassium. Potassium, the opposite of sodium, is the major intracellular ion. You see it mostly inside the cells. The normal range is about 3.5 to 5.0. What does it do? It actually helps in establishing the resting membrane potential in neuron and muscle fibers after you have your depolarization, your repolarization, and all of that. It's highly involved in that. So if you do have any situation that causes an imbalance in potassium, you would also have problems with your resting membrane potential. If you do have problems with your resting membrane potential, your cells may not be able to fire the way they should fire, and then consequently, you would also have problems with things like triggering, what do they call this, contractions and all that, because it's like a sequence. All right, then it has, unlike sodium, it has very little effect on sodium, the osmotic pressure. Okay, and its gradient, the gradient between the ICF and the ECF, the ICF is the intracellular fluid, the ECF is the extracellular fluid. The gradient between them is maintained by sodium potassium ATPase pump. Sorry, it's not written there. Sodium potassium ATPase pump. It's an energy consuming pump, all right, that helps to maintain that gradients. So the recommendation for daily intake is about 4,000 milligrams per day. You get it from fruits, vegetables that are also rich in potassium. Fruits like, I think, banana is rich in potassium. So usually, if regulation of potassium concentration is by the kidneys, okay, and like I said, the hormone that controls it is aldosterone. Aldosterone is a hormone that works on the kidney tissues. kidney interstitium, and encourages the uptake of sodium while exchanging it for potassium. All right, so usually it's controlled, that particular function is controlled by the sodium-potassium exchange forms in the distal convoluting tubule and the collecting duct of the nephrons. So that's where you have that regulation taking place. And when you have a low ECF pH, when you have that acidosis, what happens is that pump also is able to get rid of hydrogen. So when you have more hydrogen than potassium, you would have more potassium being, kind of like more hydrogen being kind of thrown out instead of potassium. Both of them struggle for spaces on that pump. So you either throw out the potassium or throw out the hydrogen ions. So if you do have high levels of hydrogen ions, in the ECF, most likely you have hydrogen ions being thrown out so as to raise the pH of the blood higher. So you could have changes in potassium levels. Then what else? Okay. Let's see. So hypokalemia, just like you have hyponatremia, you have hypernatremia, you also have hypokalemia. And hypokalemia is when you have an abnormally low potassium blood level, usually lower than the lower limit of normal, which is about 3.5. So what are the things that could result in hypokalemia? If you do have anything that causes an absolute reduction of potassium in the body, you will have hypokalemia. And if you do have something that can cause potassium, to be pushed into cells, that's called a redistribution of potassium. Having it being pushed more into cells, you could have a hypokalemia, all right? So how do you have absolute reduction of potassium in the body? If you have situations where you're losing potassium, like diarrhea, okay? If you have diarrhea, you can have that because you're losing potassium. If you have alkalosis is high pH of the blood, you could also have hypokalemia. Then if you have aldosteronism where the pump is overworking, you will have potassium being thrown out, so you will have hypokalemia. Then if you are not eating enough, taking enough potassium in your diet, you can also have hypokalemia. All right. Okay. So what are the symptoms with hypokalemia? You could have muscular weakness, paralysis of the heart, and so many other things happening. So hypokalemia will be the opposite of hypokalemia, all right? And it occurs if you have an elevated potassium blood level, all right, above the upper limit of normal. The upper limit of normal should be 5.0 millimoles per liter. And when it happens, a lot of things can go wrong, like impairment of skeletal muscle function, the function of the nervous system, and also the function of the heart. So you don't want anything happening to that. Usually hyperkalemia is more common than hypokalemia. And the physicians are actually worried when you do have hyperkalemia. Okay, so it's what causes hyperkalemia. If you do have increased dietary intake of potassium, you could have hyperkalemia. If you are chronically having acidosis, you would have hyperkalemia because when you have that exchange, that sodium-potassium pump exchange, you will have more what do they call it? More potassium being retained because you have more hydrogen ions being thrown out. You have kidney failure. I told you that the main organ for regulation of potassium level is kidney. So if you do have kidney failure, you will have hyperkalemia. And then there are some diuretics that spare potassium while they work. So if you do take those kind of diuretics, you will have hyperkalemia in the long run. Okay, why are we so concerned about hyperkalemia? This is because it affects the action potential of cells, it affects the depolarization stage, it affects the regularization of space, it affects the resting membrane. So for organs like the heart, it means that the heart will not be able to relax after a contraction. And we need it to contract, relax, contract, relax. So what you now have is that if you cannot relax after a contraction, it will cease, remain contracted, it will stop pumping blood. And within minutes, a person can have a cardiac accident, okay, like a cardiac arrest, and all that. And that can lead to death if it's not taken care of on time. So hyperkalemia also can result in central nervous system effects like you have mental confusion, you have numbness, you have weakened respiratory muscles, and all of that. So chloride. Chloride is the predominant extracellular ion companion for sodium. So wherever sodium goes, chloride follows. The normal range for chloride is 96 to 108 millimoles per liter, and it is a major contribution to the osmotic pressure gradient also between the ICM and the ECM, and it plays a very important role in water balance. Chloride also functions to balance the cations in the ECM. So in this way, it is able to maintain electrical neutrality. If not so, by the time I touch you will get shocked, another person, all things. In fact, electricity will be bringing in our bodies, but chloride is there to maintain that electrical neutrality. All right. We get it from diet with salt. When we take salt is NaCl. So when we take salt, we get it from diet, and the excretion is by the kidneys. As sodium is being excreted, chloride will also be excreted, and some of it is also excreted in sweat. That is why if you taste your sweat, it is salty. We could have low levels of chloride in the body, and that is called hypochloremia. That is when you have levels lower than 96 millimoles per liter. And this could occur if you do have problems with the kidney, like you have defective renal tubular absorption. Also, if you are vomiting, you would have hypochloremia because your gastric juice is made up mainly of HCl. HCl, one of the components is the Cl, which is the chloride. So if you're vomiting it, you are vomiting chloride. Okay, so the level of chloride will be lower in the body, leading to hypochloremia. Also, if you do have metabolic acidosis, you could also have hypochloremia. So what are the signs or symptoms of hypochloremia? You could have fluid loss, dehydration, weakness, fatigue, difficulty in breathing, and all that. So for the hyperchloremia, it's when you have higher than normal level blood chloride levels, higher than about 108 millimoles per liter. And things that can cause hyperchloremia includes dehydration, excessive intake of dietary salt. If you do go to swim in the sea, I don't even know what carried you there, and you swallow seawater, you could have hyperchloremia. If you overdose on aspirin, you're going to have hyperchloremia. If you have congestive heart failure, hyperchloremia. If you do have chronic lung disease or cystic fibrosis, you would also have hyperchloremia. Like for people who have cystic fibrosis, they do have the chloride in sweat are like 2 to 5 times those of normal levels. And if you do analyze the chloride in the sweat, you will be able to diagnose cystic fibrosis. So people with hyperchloremia have fluid retention, they have high blood pressure, they have muscle weakness, spasms, twitches, irregular heart rate, numbing, tingling. Could also have CNS neurological problems like confusion, difficulty in concentrating, personality changes, seizures, and convulsion. So hyperchloremia also is more common than hypochloremia. So bicarbonates. Bicarbonates, after chloride, is the second most abundant anion in the blood. All right, the normal range is about 22 to 28 millimoles per liter, and its principal function is to maintain the body's acid-base balance you know, because it's a very important part of the buffer system, the bicarbonate carbonic acid buffer system. It's very important. So its principal function is to manage or be able to regulate acid-base balance. In fact, if you do look at it, it's about, it makes up about 80%, you know, of the buffer system. And it's actually, that particular buffer system is the first line of defense when you come to acid-base balance. We will talk about it more when we get to our new topic, acid balance. So please wait excitedly for it. It's going to be another blast. Bicarbonate ions usually result from a chemical reaction, very interesting chemical reaction that is catalyzed by carbonic anhydrase, where you have the CO2 that is produced in reactions, aerobic reactions that take place in the body. A lot of it that has to be gotten rid of. So what happens is, and if you look at the CO2, it can only be dissolved just a little, you know, in the plasma. So it will be toxic if a lot of it is found in plasma. So what happens is that the CO2 that is produced binds with water to form carbonic acid. Carbonic acid is a weak, very weak acid, all right, which breaks into bicarbonates, which are conjugate base, and hydrogen ion, all right? So this is how most of the CO2 is gotten rid of. So because it is bidirectional, it means that the reaction can go forward to give you the bicarbonate and hydrogen ion. It can also go backward. So this is very important because in the tissues, you have the forward reaction where you have your CO2 and water giving your carbonic carbonic acid, giving rise to your bicarbonate. Okay, so when it gets to the lungs, you have, you know, the reverse action taking place. Okay, to give you your, that is when I say the reverse action, your hydrogen, your bicarbonate to give you carbonic acid, which will give you water and CO2, which is released by the lungs outside. All right, so it's reversible. All right, so it depends on the concentration of the reactions. In the tissue, you have more CO2. Okay, so you have the forward reaction, and in the lungs, you have more of the bicarbonate, so you would have the backward reaction taking place. Also, I think that reaction also takes place in the kidneys when you have your reclamation of bicarbonates. By the kidneys, you do have this reaction, the backward reaction taking place. All right. Okay, so having looked at that, let's look at electrolyte imbalance. Oh, I forgot to mention that if you do have an imbalance in bicarbonate levels, you could have acidosis, or you could have alkalosis. Acidosis is when you do have low levels of bicarbonate, and alkalosis is when you do have high levels of bicarbonate. It's very interesting. I will deal with it in my next video, so please don't forget to watch the next video. Electrolyte imbalance. So because these electrolytes are very important for many things that happen in the cell and in general the body, you need to maintain the gradients in the different compartments that we find themselves. And if these concentration gradients or the electrolyte levels are disturbed, you would have serious consequences for the cells. Why? Because most of them are responsible for cell function. You will have impairment of the cell's activity and therefore the cell's life or the cell's vitality. All right. You could also have things like decreased action and resting membrane potential, which is very important for contraction and relaxation, and also for nerve impulses. So if you do have electrolyte this balance that could be affected, you could also have development of electric instability, and that would not go well for homeostasis. Then you could have permeability of cellular membranes being increased. Okay, so if the membrane is more permeable for ions, gradients cannot be maintained. And if gradients cannot be maintained, a lot of things will go haywire. Then you could also have disruption of biochemical reactions in the body, because a lot of these ions are needed for as part of enzymatic reactions, as part of reactions themselves. They are reactants themselves sometimes. So if you do have problems, imbalances, you would have problems in those reactions that they help to catalyze or they are part of. Then, if this happens over time, the cell can only take it for a certain amount of time. If that imbalance is not corrected, you will now have injury occurring. Once this injury occurs, most of the time the injury is reversible. And once the injury of cells occur, you would have things called necrosis happening, and you will have cell death also happening. When that happens in the tissue where it occurs, you would have things like fibrosis being occurring, ischemia, like in the heart, you could have a myocardial infarct, occurring and all that. That could lead to problems in those organs. So you don't want to have electrolyte imbalance happening either in the short term or in the long term. So it's very important to correct it when you do see it. So conditions associated with electrolyte balance. There are many diseases that could lead, or conditions that could lead to imbalance in electrolyte levels. They include coronary heart disease, traumatic and surgical events. When you talk about surgical events, especially your potassium, your dysrhythmias, your post-operative periods, your chest pain, angina pectoris, if you do have an open heart surgery, if you do have myocardial infarction, if you're burnt, you would lose a lot of fluids that are rich in electrolytes that can cause electrolyte imbalance. If you have heart valve disease, digitalis therapy, pregnant. If you're pregnant, pregnancy is not a disease, it's a condition. And a lot of things happen because of the accumulation of water and the changes that are happening in the body system. You could also have some sort of electrolyte imbalance. If you're distressed, you're hypertensive, congestive heart failure, cramps in the legs, your undergoing diuretic therapy, diabetes mellitus that is uncontrolled, hormonal dysregulation of whatever type, intensive care, alcoholism, cardiac arrest. These are conditions that are associated with electrolyte imbalance. And some of the things that could occur in the body if you do have electrolyte imbalance is confusion and irritability, diarrhea and constipation, fatigue, headaches. You would want to vomit. You would feel some kind of like pin prick. It's as if many pins are pricking you in your fingers, your toes. If you're walking, it's as if you're walking on the mat full of pins. If you keep your hands on somewhere, you will feel pinpricks all over. Irregular heart rates, we call arrhythmias, muscle cramps, coma, seizures, sudden cardiac arrest also could happen if you do have electrolyte imbalance. Another important thing we're going to look at is the anion gap. After carrying out your routine electrolytes like your sodium, potassium, chloride, and bicarbonate, okay, you could do what is called an anion gap. Your anion gap is like a difference between what the ions you've measured, and the cations you've measured. When you do that, you should have a particular gap. There are two formulas for it. You could use sodium and potassium. The difference between the sum of sodium and potassium and chloride and bicarbonate, you could also use the difference between sodium only and chloride and bicarbonate. If you do use the first formula, you will have anion gap between 11 to 18 millimoles per liter. And then if you use the sodium only, you have an ionic gap of about 7 to 14 millimoles per liter. And your anion gap could be high, it could be low, it could be more normal. You do that to be able to discern, what is the problem with the electrolytes. Is there certain kind of problems? What is the disturbance in these electrolytes? For instance, if you do have high ionic gap, you would have it in most cases of metabolic acidosis, due to maybe methanol poisoning, uremia, diabetic ketoacidosis, propylene glycol poisoning, isoniazid intoxication, lactic acidosis, ethylene glycol poisoning, rhabdomyolysis, renal failure, and salicylate consumption. That is salicylate poisoning. You could have high ionic gaps. And if you do notice a high ionic gaps, you can now begin to do some extra tests, like looking at if there are ketones in the body. You could also check for some of these things, the metabolites of some of these things, to be able to find out what really is the problem and match it up with the clinical picture that you're seeing. So if you do have low anion gap, it could be because of hypoalbuminemia, it could be because of plasma cell dysplasia, monoclonal proteins like your paraproteins, your bromide intoxication. And then sometimes you could also have conditions. The anion gap is normal, but the electrolytes are not normal. All right, so like if you have diarrhea, you're recovering from diabetic ketoacidosis, have some kind of fluid loss, renal tubular acidosis, and arginine and lysine in parenteral nutrition, you could have problems with electrolyte, but the anionic gap is normal. All right, but note of warning: before you calculate your anion gap, make sure that your instrument is working. Your instruments that you use to measure your sodium, your potassium, your chloride, your bicarbonate, make sure that your values that you've gotten are standard. If you have a suspicion that your values are not standard, please go back and repeat the test before you calculate your anion gap. Sometimes when you do have a low anion gap, it could be a pointer to your machine not working well. So it is good to recalibrate it and repeat the test and be sure of what you're doing. So how do we then measure electrolytes? You could measure electrolytes using flame emission photometry, especially for the cations, your ion selective electrodes, your atomic absorption spectrophotometry. You could also use chemical methods like the Van Slyke method, back titration method, your scales and scales for chloride, micrometric titration. All right, so many chemical methods are available to measure these electrolytes, but we do prefer things like the ion selective electrode, which is quite what is in range now. And then you have your flame absorption spectroscopy. All right. Before I thank you for listening, how do we correct electrolyte imbalance? Usually, the first thing you will do is to give oral rehydration therapy, but that is not going to cure it. So what you will want to do is to treat the underlying disorder that is causing that electrolyte imbalance, and you will invariably be able to treat the electrolyte imbalance. Then when you carry out your test, it will enable you to know where you do have the electrolyte imbalance, and you do your symptomatic treatment depending on what kind of imbalance that you're noticing. So after having said that, I want to say thank you for listening. It has been a wonderful day with you, and I can't wait to meet with you in our next video. Thank you. God bless you, and bye.